Hello there, hello guys. So in the last video we have done a lot of about logging, and we have done in the previous chapters post module, users module, and in this chapter it will get a bit complicated, you could say. But I'll try my best to explain it and make it as simple as possible. So what we will do today is we will do a part of the chapter which is authentication, or you could say guards. So let's take an overview of the diagram that we have at the moment in our current architecture. So the structure file, you could say, looks like this at the moment. We have our users controller. Oopsie, I almost showed the scary part. So user service as a provider, our module, our post module, our controller, our post service, and they are related together. And then as the root is the app module. Now for the authentication, I have labeled the stuff that we are going to cover today green, and the other one would be for another video. So we'll be covering the auth controller, we'll be doing service as well, and local strategy and passport module. So as the name suggests, for authentication we'll be using passport, and if you don't understand, I think I'll try my best to explain it, what passport and how passport is. But simple put, it's a library that has been in Nodejs years and years and years, and most people would use it as a default. And if you know passport, so we'll be using the local strategy, so that means that we are going to use our own logic, which is validating or logging. The user is logging in by email and password. Instead of username and password, we'll be using email and password. So we'll set up, first we have to do the installation, and then we'll be doing the service. We're setting up the service, the strategy, the controller, and completely combining everything, the authentication for this video. So let's do that. And what we have to do is first install. So let me clear this up. So what we have to install is npm install. I hope that I remember. So we have something called Nestjs passport, and we have passport, the normal passport, and the strategy that we will be using, which will be called passport local. I hope that every single one that I have written here is correct. And let's wait for a while. Now what we need to install as well is npm install. We have to install the types of passport, I think. I hope that it's correct, the types of the passport itself, and that will be it for the installation. Now we are going to create a module, and not a CRUD module where we have generated similar to a post, but we just are creating a file. So we are going to use our CLI, so we'll say nest generate, or you could say G, and we will say nest generate a module, and that module will be called auth. So it will create a folder, and that folder will be called auth, and it will have a file called auth module. We have created one here. We have auth module, and it updated our app.module module to register our auth module. Next would be, we want to create a service that will be called service, and it will be in the auth module itself. So we will generate Nestjs service auth module, and also we will want to add controller, so I'll mention controller, and it will be in the auth module as well. Now we have added our functions. Let me remove these ones, we don't need them, so let me remove it. Now next would be setting up our auth service, and in our auth service what we will have is a function called validate user, and that validate user is specifically meant for our, we could add our logic. So that logic would be email. So in the validate user we'll be having a parameter called email, and we'll be having password as well. Next would be what we need to have in our service to validate or get the user first by email. We have to have the service, user service. So if you already know by now that we have to import in our auth module the user service. So let's use a module, I mean. So here we'll create our user service, type of user service, we'll open a curly braces, that will be it. And here we'll say, for example, const user, and what we'll be having here is the user itself, and what we will be doing is this dot user service, and we'll mention get user, and we'll create a function by user by email, and that will be what we want, and we'll mention, we'll be asking for the email. And in here what we need to validate in our function, what we have to do is we want to check if the user exists, if there is no user, or if the user dot password not equals to password itself. What we'll do is here we'll say return false, otherwise we'll return our specified user. So that will be for our user service for a validate user. Now what we will do is we'll go to the auth module, and in here we'll import our users module, and we will mention here users module. It's coming from here, better mention this, and I have to update it here as well. So now we have imported our users module. Next would be create a function that is called get user by email, and what we have to do is we won't throw an error there, but what we will do is we will go to our user service, and around here we'll create a new function, get user by email, and in here we'll mention email itself, and we'll use that. And in here we'll ask result, actually user, not really, we'll just return that specific user. So we'll say users dot find, and in here we'll ask for user, and we'll mention user dot email equals to email. So if it doesn't find it, it will be undefined. Other than that, it will return a user. So that will be it for our function. So what will be next? We have done our auth service, we have done our auth module, and we will be having one function in auth controller, and we will add that here. We'll say it will be a post method, and that post method will have something called login in here. So let's import that part. We'll say oh, and I forgot I have to, yeah, alright, I forgot to make it zoom, so I had to zoom a bit. So now in here we'll have a function called login, and for now we won't add anything, and it will be for the next video. So what will be next? We have our controller, our auth service, our auth module, but we need to have our local strategy and passport module. So what we need, so I've mentioned here that it is a provider. So this local strategy will be acting like a service. Basically it has a provider, it's a provider, and the passport module, as the name suggests, it's an passport module, and will import it in auth module. So I think, yeah, we will create first something called local dot, it doesn't matter how you're creating the file, but for now, for my case, I like to call it here local.strategy.ts, and in here we'll make something called export class, and we'll call it local strategy. And what we need here is we need to import, we need to extend, so this local strategy will extend or inherit the functionality of the local strategy of passport. So what we will do is use extends, and we will import passport strategy, which is coming from our Nestjs. So this is the thing that we have installed. So this one is wrapping around the Passportjs of the library and putting it as a module itself. So we have Passportjs. So in here, what it requires, so as you've noticed, it's giving us an error, and that is because we need to specify the strategy we want to use, and we will import here. From there, we'll mention it is coming from our passport local, and we'll mention here the strategy. So strategy. Okay. So next, when we imported the strategy, we'll put it here in our passport strategy. So we'll put that. So next would be, we'll be having a constructor, and usually in a local strategy for the passport, as a default, it will try to use or validate the functionality of the attributes called username or passport, usually for login. But for our case, it will be an email and password, so we want to change it. So what we have to do is we will use constructor, and in the constructor, since we are mentioning as a constructor and it is inheriting the passport strategy, we will be using super. And within the super, what we have to do is we need to mention here in the super that we want to redefine the username and password. And what I mean by username and password is, when you say control space, I think there should have been a control space. Okay, there is not. Yeah, I think because I don't have the types for it. So let's try to install this really quickly. We'll say npm install types, and that will be passport local. I hope that it exists. Yeah, it exists, it exists. So when we go here, yeah, there you go, there you go. We got our function. So when we say control space, so what I tried installing was passport local, the types of the passport local. So when we go to control space, so we will check what function we have, and we have several functions here. What we need to do is we will use something called validate function, and then in the validate we'll be having something called username, and it will be a type of string, and password type of string. Usually it will look like that. Username will be used and password will be used for logging in, but in our case we want to change it as email and password, so for the user to log in. So that will be it. So what we have to do in our super, what we have to do is we have to change the username field. So username, what was it called, username field? Let me check a bit. Yeah, actually it is should have been username field, and that field will be email, and password field, I think, yeah, for password is okay. So username field we are replacing with username with email. So that's what the local strategy will use. Instead of using username field, it will be using as email. So for our postman, we will just input email and it will understand the local strategy. So now in the validate function, what we'll be having is there's nothing here at the moment, right? Because we don't have anything to validate. So what we need to do is import our auth service. So simply we could say here private auth service that we have created earlier, and it will be a type of auth service, and in here validate, what we'll be saying is const user equals to this dot auth service validate user, and the validate user will be trying to validate will be email with email and password. So that will be it. And in here the validate function for it, what it does is when it's not valid, it will throw an error. Like when we are trying to log in, it will throw an error. Otherwise it will return the user and put it in the request as request.user. So I'll explain that a bit and I'll showcase that in the next video, but for this video we'll just prepare everything for the login or authentication for our auth module. So what we'll do here is, since we mentioned it will be either false or it will be a user, so I'll mention here as, let me clean it up here, let me mention here that if there is no user, then that means we will throw unauthorized exception. So that will be what we will be throwing. So let me say throw, and let me import that unauthorized. I think is not called, but did you mean new? Yeah, it's an instance. Let me say throw new unauthorized exception, so it's an instance of a class. So throw new unauthorized exception. So we are saying if the user does not exist, throw an unauthorized exception. Otherwise, return the user. So I think, yeah, that will be it for this video. So what we have done is we have we prepared our auth module. Oh yeah, before that I almost forgot, we have to import our passport module, and we have to put the local strategy in our auth module as well. So let me go towards our auth module, and in here what we have to do is we will import our local strategy here. So we'll import that, and what we have to do here is we will import our passport module over here. So similarly in imports we will be using passport module. So I think that will be it, totally, I'm sure. So hopefully we have created our auth controller using the CLI, and we have created an endpoint. We have imported our passport module, local strategy. We have created our validate user function, and that validate user function will be checking for email and password and validate if the password is correct or not, and otherwise otherwise it will return a user. And as well, we have used the well-known passport strategy, and the passport strategy we are currently using is the one that we are validating with the username and password, but we have replaced it with as an email, and we made a function called validate, and that validate will either return a user or not a user. So it feels like a bit convoluted or a bit confusing if you haven't gone with Express or with the middleware, and I can understand that it is a bit confusing. So you could say that what we are going to do in the passport strategy is it will go towards the request and response. So before even before hitting the login function, what we are doing is, instead of putting the logic within the login function, what usually the passport would do is we will validate first before going to any kind of function. So for example, this login function. So first it will go through the strategy, and the strategy will be, for instance, the local.strategy. So in here, what it tries to do is it will try to get the email and the password from the body of, for example, from the request that is coming from the postman. So the moment it hits, we will use the validate user function, and that validate user function will check if that user exists before even going to the auth controller that is called the function login. So when it exists, it will return true. So basically the login function will be continued, and what we could do, we could return a JSON web token, or we could do a message that the user has logged in successfully. Otherwise, if there's any problem, we will throw in a new exception. So the body, what I'm talking about, will be here. So here. So instead, so passport, usually what happens is we would for the login it would be a username and password. So for the request it will check for a username and password. But again, here I have replaced it with an email, and that will be changed towards the email. So I think, yeah. So in the next video, we are combining everything and try and test out the request and response with our new local strategy and the new authentication. So thank you and have a good day.